All right, welcome back everybody. If this is your first time to the channel, welcome to Notes to Fret, where we are all about turning theory into riffs. And this is a continued video in our series on scales and modes. And this is our second part, or part two. Here we are going to be talking about the minor scale. And when we start talking about the minor scale, it's going to have a pattern that looks familiar, based off what we looked at in the previous video for the major scale. Here, however, we have a whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, which again, to guitar players, that sounds, pretty obnoxious. So just kind of a quick refresher. When we talk about a half step, we talk about one fret. And here our H's, that represents one fret. And again, we look at the whole tone or the whole step, and that's 2 frets, right? So the W's here, whole step. And again, other terms that we're going to use, and this is a refresher, but the other terms that you'll hear referenced is semitone. And we know that means 1 fret. Or you may hear tone or whole tone, and that means 2 frets. But as guitar players, we like to talk about frets, or we at least like to know, how many, frets up or back we're going to move. So we'll look at the fret count here. And we see that we move up 2 for every whole step and 1 for every half step, right? And so this probably looks, very familiar. It's very similar to the major scale with a pattern difference. Now you may be looking at this thinking, oh, wow, is there another pattern I have to learn? Well, you can, and eventually this will become habitual, but there's a better way than trying to memorize this pattern, and we're going to get to that in this video. But the first thing I want to do is verify and validate this pattern. And what I want to do in order to do that is look at our A minor scale. Now we all have, heard plenty of times that C major has no sharps and has no flats. And we looked at that and proved that in our previous video for the major scale. And we know that A minor is the relative minor to C major. So we say A minor has no sharps and it has no flats because it's the relative minor to C. All well and good, true statements all the way around. However, let's verify that in fact, A minor has no sharps and no flats by applying the A minor scale to the pattern that we have with whole step, half step, whole step, half step, whole step, whole step. Okay, let's just verify that really quick. So when we start with A, we move to B, that's 2 frets. Then we go B to C, that's 1 fret. C to D, that's 2 frets. D to E, 2 frets. E to F, 1 fret. F to G, that's 2 frets. And G to A, that's also 2 steps. Because as we know, we always start and stop the scale on the same note, right? So now, the other thing that we need to just make certain of really quick is if we add up all the frets that we moved through our scale, right? In this case, 2, 1, 2, 2, 1, 2, 2, right? We add all those up. Well, we do still move up those 12 frets, meaning that this A minor pattern, we still move up the complete octave. All of our spacing between A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and A, they all line up with the whole step, half step, whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, right? So this is a verification that the A minor is indeed a minor with no sharps and no flats, which gives us our relative minor from C major, okay? Now, just by looking at this, theoretically, you could pretty much stop here. But what I really want to do is visit the true relationship between the major and the relative minor. Because there's a lot more to this. And I think by diving into it quite a bit more deeply, you'll get a very fundamental understanding as to why you don't need to memorize pattern after pattern after pattern, but you can kind of naturally begin to construct these these scales very easily and very quickly. So with that being said, we're going to revisit our C major scale. And if you recall from our previous video, our major scale is a whole step, half step, whole step, half step, right? If you've missed the previous video, this is pretty much just, you know, what we just looked at from the minor perspective, but on a major scale. This pattern right here being the most important one that you're ever going to learn. This one, major scale, know it because everything will be built off of this. And we're going to talk about how we build the A minor scale from our C major. And if you remember on our C major, if we start on C on the far right hand side, in this case the C with the 8 above it because we've moved up an octave at that point, and we said if we move back a minor third, which we know is 3 frets, we wind up on the minor, the relative minor. So if we start on C, but with the 8 above it, and we move back a minor third, which is 1 fret, we get to B, 2 more frets, we get to A. So that's our minor third. So if we start on C and move up our fretboard from our body towards the head, if we move back, we'll move back 3 frets, which is a minor third. And if we start on C and move back that minor third, we'll wind up on A. So that's a quick way, if you're on your fretboard, to immediately know what the relative minor of any note you're on, right? You can do that in G. You move back a minor third, right? You're going to wind up on G. You're going to wind up on E. So we know that A is our relative minor, and we know that the minor scale has this pattern. And so you can see the difference here between the whole step, half step, whole step, half step of major to the minor whole step, half step, whole step, half step, whole step, whole step. And I'm hoping you're going to get tired of listening to me say that pattern as it just drills in. But you know, how do these two necessarily relate? We talked about looking at our fretboard and moving back a minor third, but what does that really mean? Like how does that get constructed? So from here, if we are looking at our major scale and we notice the relative minor, you'll see the 6 above it. The 6 above the A, they'll call it the 6th degree of the scale, which is hyper annoying. And as guitar players, we just like to say the 6th note in the scale. Cool. But you will hear other musicians refer to this as the 6th degree. And you will hear it obviously referred to as the relative minor. But for now, let's just look at it as the 6th note in the scale of C major is A. So we're going to start there because we know we want to evaluate the minor scale, and we know that A is the relative minor of C. So we're going to start there. And what we're going to do is we're just kind of slide that A over, then we're going to slide that B over. And if we look at this right off the bat, we notice that there's a whole step between A and B. Okay, no problem. Now with the C, we're not going to start on the octave. We're going to start back on the first C with the number 1 above it. When we get into ninths and 11ths and 14ths, which we will get into, leaving that 8 there will make more sense. But for now, when we talked about going back to the C, we're just coming back to our initial C. And as we slide that C down, we can see that we have a half step between the B and the C. So on and so forth, right? We're just going to slide each one of the notes of the scale down, and we can see this pattern starting to emerge naturally, which is, incidentally, the minor scale. Right? And so as we look at this, and we end up on the same note that we started with, and we're just going to put the number 8 above that because we know we've moved up a complete octave. Now, as we move up here, we have the minor scale, and we see that we constructed that minor scale from where we started in the major scale, right? We started on the 6th degree, and we just kind of moved down and shifted. That's all that we really did. So Here again, as we're just kind of, you know, putting the two side by side more or less. As we look at the A on the far right with the question mark above it, a little while ago we said, okay, well that's the eighth note, but if A is the eighth, how is A the sixth and the eighth, right? And that doesn't make a whole lot of sense there, right? Because even though the A is the sixth in the major scale, we started on it, but really what we want is that is our number one as we move into the minor. So even though we started on the sixth degree, it became our first degree when we moved into our minor, okay? And so now the A that we moved up an octave on the far right has the 8 above it. But what I want to pay attention to here really is what happens after A, right? When we move from A to B, well, we've moved a whole step, right? And same thing on A to B in the minor, and that's followed by a half step. So too is the minor, it's followed by the half step. We come back to our first note in the scale, which is a whole step, followed by another whole step. From there, we move into a half step, and that again is followed by 2 whole steps, and we wind up right back where we started. So really, the way that we got the minor scale is just by shifting from the major scale. So if we know the major scale, all we need to do to figure out exactly what the minor scale looks like is just start at a different position, right? That's all we're doing. And so with that, when we're looking at the minor scale, if we want to find out what the relative major scale is, in this case, the relative major of A minor is C major, all we have to do is move up a minor third from A, or, as guitar players like to say it, move up 3 frets on your fretboard. So if you're on A and you move up 3 frets, which is also a minor third, you'll wind up on a C. And so if you're looking at the minor scale and you want to know what the relative major is, it's very quick, very easy. It's the third note in the scale, or it's the third degree of the minor scale. Okay? So that's how the minor gets constructed from the major, and we can look at this very quickly and determine a relative major and minor very quickly by looking at these patterns and these scales. So here again, just to kind of drive the shifting concept home a little bit more, as we look at the major and the minor here, when we wanted to construct the minor, right, and we wanted to go from our major to our minor, the only thing that we really did was we just started counting our whole steps and our half steps from a different location from within the major scale. So from within the major scale, we just said, as opposed to starting off on the first whole step, we're going to start off on the whole step after our A, right, our 6th note in the scale. So we're just starting on our 6th and we're making that our first. That's it. That's how we're getting the minor pattern. That's the whole scoop to it. So here, just kind of a quick refresher, the half step and the whole step, right? They equate to 1 fret and 2 frets. Let's take a look at, you can't see me right now, but I'm kind of doing air quotes. Let's look at a complex minor, right? We'll go with F sharp. Well, all we need to do, we know that if we're going to move up from F sharp, we're going to have to move up a whole step or 2 frets, and that puts us at G sharp. Okay. Now from G sharp, if we go up a half step, we wind up on A. A, if we move up 2 frets or a whole step, we wind up on B. And from B, if we move up a whole step or 2 frets, we wind up on C sharp. Okay. And there from C sharp, half step, we wind up on D. And then From D, we move up 2 frets, we wind up on E. And as we know, this is kind of our little sanity check here. We're always going to end on the same note that we started. So hopefully between the last note or the E and the last note, we have a whole step. And in this case, we do. So this is F sharp minor, right? All we did was start with F sharp, and then we let everything else fall into place. That's all we did. We start with F sharp and then let everything else fall in place. And here, very quickly by looking at this, or if you're on your fretboard and you move up 3 frets or a minor third, you'll wind up on an A. And in fact, A major is the relative major of F sharp minor. Correspondingly, F sharp minor is the relative minor from A major, right? And so it, that was pretty much it. Now, the one thing that I will say, and I do this to this day, this is the first thing I write out. So if I'm gonna write a piece of music, I write this down and then I just fill it in with whatever key that I'm going to write something in. Right? It doesn't matter if I'm just going to write a couple of licks or it does anything. I write this down. And for if you're just starting off, it could be very useful to write down, how many frets each one moves as well. But this is how I start. This is everything that I do. To this day, I still start by writing this down. It's a very quick reference. So let's say that I want to have something in B flat minor. Okay. Right off the bat, I know that I have to fill in all the notes, right? C, D, E, F, G, A, and then wind up back on B, right? Just because all the notes are going to be in the scale. So I just write them out. I mean, I start off with this, all the time. And I wind up, finishing off on the same note that I start. And then from there, I just look at what I need to fill in. So in this case, right, B flat to C, that's a pretty easy one, right? Because it's a whole step. And then, from C to the next, it's a half step. So obviously I got to flatten the D. And from the D flat to the next, I'm going to have to flatten the E because it's a whole step. And, all I'm doing is walking through and filling in each one of the notes and whether or not it's going to be natural, which means no sharps or no flats, or if it's going to be flat, right? So F to G is a whole step, so I can only have a half step, so I got to flatten my G. And then from G flat to A is more than a whole step, so I know that I'm going to have to flatten out my A. And then, finally, we wind up on the sanity check of making certain that we wind up on the last note with, a proper whole step, in this case, B flat. So that's it. That's the way, if you write this pattern out and you just start on a note, you'll have everything. All you got to do is kind of fill in the blanks at that point, right? Now, one of the things here that I just want to reiterate, we've gone over this, but just to make it a little bit clear and trying to get rid of any notes or any particular scale, let's talk about degrees just for a moment, right? In first, second, third degree, first note, second note, third note, fourth note, right? We're just putting numbers here. So when we look at the major scale, and again, to kind of reiterate how we are actually going from our major into our minor, right? We're not gonna, for the starting off on the minor, we're not gonna start with the same first, we're gonna start with the sixth, which we spoke about, right? So we're just kind of moving that sixth over, and then we're filling everything out, and we just, we're just moving through the notes of the scale. We just start on a different location. So in our major scale at the top of the slide, you can see that we're on our sixth, and we have a whole step to a half step. Same thing at the bottom. You can see from the beginning of the minor scale, we go from whole step to half step. And then that half step is followed by a whole step. Same with down at the bottom. Obviously, it takes a longer path at the top. And then that whole step is followed by another whole step. So we're following the exact same pattern. There's absolutely no difference in this pattern we are just simply looking at the index that we start from, right? Obviously, in our major scale, we start at the 1st degree. And then in our minor scale, we start from the 6th degree. And we change that over to our 1st as we talk about our minor. But it's the exact same pattern. It's the exact same, right? It's just kind of depending on where we start. So as long as you know your major scale, your minor scale, you can figure out very, very quickly. So as we're looking at this, that's pretty much, we finish that off and we're right back, right? Our major scale and our minor scale. We're all there. One thing I do want to bring up is from here, the next video that I'm putting together in the series is going to be all about modes. They'll be a little bit quicker than these first 2 videos between the major and the minor scale, because the major and the minor really are the two most. The major is definitely the most important, but the major and the minor are the most spoken about, right? When you hear about music, you always hear musicians talking about major or minor, but there's a lot of modes in between. And little bit of a spoiler alert, the major scale is called Ionian, and it's really called the Ionian mode. The minor scale is called Aeolian, or the Aeolian mode. So again, spoiler alert, you already know 2 of the modes, and you know how the Aeolian is constructed from the major scale, right? Aeolian being minor. You know how the minor scale is constructed from the major now. And the modes follow that same pattern. So once you know that major scale, you know all your modes. But we will talk about them in the other videos. Again, they'll be a little bit shorter than these first 2. But the one thing that I do want to kind of just plan in your mind before we get into those, next series of modes is the 2 areas that we're going to talk about modes is one is the construction, right? So here we spoke about how to construct the minor scale from the major scale, how to construct the minor scale, or another term, we spoke about how to construct the Aeolian mode from the Ionian mode. But that sounds hyper obnoxious. But same exact term, we learned how to construct the minor scale from the major scale. And we're going to do that for all the modes. First, we're going to learn how to construct them. Following that, we'll talk about how we can use them, right? And that's really the cool, beautiful, awesome part about music. When you know how to construct something, and that construction is one part of it, but the creativity and that unique sound that you find as a musician, that's the artistic part of it. And looking at all this stuff and knowing when to break all these rules and everything else, right? These are just guidelines, informational. There's plenty of times when these patterns get broken. So anyways, enough said about that. Here, the minor scale. Let me know down in the comments if there's anything that's tripping you up on any of this. I'll be happy to clarify. But with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and close out the video, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video when we dive even further into modes. Take care, everybody.